Hi everyone, my name's Mike and I'm with the Technically Creative team and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining us for the third and final part in our CA Data Protection End of Life series. 6 steps to migrating your policies compliantly. Just a few quick notes before we begin. If you have any questions during the webinar, we will be having a Q&A section at the end. You could tweet at us using the hashtag TCEOL support or ask a question through the chat feature on the right. We will answer all questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Also, the webinar is being recorded and we will send out the recording with the slides after the webinar. Be on the lookout for that. Finally, our webinar is designed to remain client and vendor agnostic. We may discuss incidents, but we intentionally leave out anything that identifies the client or vendor involved. If a question is targeted at a specific incident, we will be sure to follow up with you directly after the webinar. The 6 steps to migrating your policies compliantly. First, identify policy stakeholders. Second, document policy details. Third, fill the gaps. 4, understand the terminology and functionality differences. 5, validate and test. And lastly, 6, plan for maintenance and refinement. All of this information will be followed by the Q&A segment at the end. And last but certainly not least, today's speakers, Danielle and Christopher Amatuli. Danielle is our CEO and Director of Business Operations. She is an Orchestra and CA Data Protection Transition Expert. And Christopher is our CTO and Director of Services and Architecture. He specializes in advanced technical implementations, systems architecture, and integrations. By their lead over the last decade plus, Technically Creative has become a certified CA Technologies Advanced Tech Partner with unrivaled experience supporting the Orchestra/CA Data Protection product. Danielle and Christopher, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mike. We're going to start this off with identifying your stakeholders. Each firm has different stakeholders when it comes to policy, but 2 main categories that are common are those responsible for policy definitions and those responsible for sign-off on acceptance criteria.
Keep in mind though, not all firms have just these 2 categories. In some firms, IT, compliance, risk, even control room, legal, and other groups have a stake in policy. Ensure you accurately define the sign-offs and process for testing and releasing policy. If you currently have a process in place and have policies properly defined, it simplifies the migration process as well. In some cases, the destination vendor may be able to pick up the documentation and greatly improve the migration success. Those of you who have worked with us are familiar with this policy release document we do for Orchestra up on the slide, but it's one example of a documentation your stakeholders should be putting together for your process. Honestly, and one of the things to point out, the main policy stakeholder is the one whose butt is on the line.
Document the policy details, the need, purpose, and the correlation to any regulations.
Who is the policy being applied to globally or only in certain groups? Who is being excluded from the policy, if anyone? The people, the person, the organization group, anything to identify these people is critical, as missing the person and not applying the proper policy can be a huge gap. This is also a major issue at a lot of firms. Identity itself in a lot of cases is broken at firms where they've managed to create surveillance gaps due to missing or even incorrectly labeled identities.
What content are you looking to capture? What is the overall objective of this policy? Always think about the content you need to cover. Are you looking for insider trading, people discussing a reward on the side from work, or even new rules around incentives? Be sure to write out what you are targeting.
Where are you looking for the content? Email, subject, body, attachments, in web activity, on a file share, in trade platforms, sent to a printer, instant messaging. All these different channels. Options will vary amongst the vendors.
When? When do you want this policy to apply? When sent externally? One individual sends it to another individual in a different department? When only internal? When containing a person in the research group? Is there an attachment present? When the mail is sent out of normal business hours? Each vendor has different options to handle this, and in some cases, they don't have an option. So be sure to review your supervision requirements with the next vendor option.
Now the why. Why is this policy being created? Is there an internal risk? Is there a regulatory concern this policy is associated with? Did something happen at the firm? All these questions and the documentation of your policy are essential for making sure your policy is well covered going forward.
When all the requirements are gathered, next comes the part where we can help out. This is the point when we would take that information with a policy architect to make the how, which leads to our next slide. Fill the gaps. Do you have adequate policy coverage to cover your supervision requirements? When examining a new solution, this is the perfect opportunity to review your current coverage and examine any gaps.
One of the things we are always asked is, what are other firms doing? My response is always, if they use us anyway, is simply going proactive. The honest answer is given each financial firm's risks are different and they operate their business different, they all do something significantly different. So while we can tell you what another firm is doing, that is most likely not right for your firm. Our best advice is to examine legal disclosures and public fines, and maybe even some of your own dirty laundry, to see if you think your coverage is complete, where you would catch it if it happened again or was happening at your firm.
Another thing to account for is specifically your policy language coverage. Are you covering the basic things in addition to some of the more advanced criteria? Is something like parking and wash trades a concern in your firm? Or maybe it's a topic like trading ahead of research, or even policies like deceptive language, or our favorite to work with, inappropriate language. You know your firm's industry the best, and while a large policy can help in creating coverage, don't shy away from the tiny targeted policies as well.
That's also a good point. A lot of times, a small targeted policy going after specific phrases around an issue may be a better gap filler than trying to write a large policy or expand an out-of-the-box one to cover your needs based on a topic that it doesn't cover currently.
Understanding the terminology and functionality differences between the vendors. Policy is something that Orchestria was way ahead on, and while it was constantly attacked on complexity, a lot of firms have come to realize with the complexity came accuracy when they started exploring other systems. Orchestria's language has been referred to as a lexicon, but is far beyond that. In technical terms, it more aligns with an NLP language that is typically associated with machine learning. Only in the cases it's manual, requiring some complex development efforts to build and maintain it. Some firms have neglected policy efforts or use simplified lexicons in place of utilizing the language, which does sometimes help in the migration, but it doesn't help in ensuring supervision is complete, covering the topics of concern or even functional, as we've seen with some firms. With today's technology, the breakaway from lexicons also seems to be the direction the majority are going, which has been difficult for some compliance groups to accept due to the regulatory questions around explain how your system works. We've had a lot of luck with the clients jumping into the machine learning world and being able to build a system which incorporates an explainable model for the regulators, even as far as putting together the frequently asked for lexicon list and wrapping that with the context to explain what's being targeted.
Just as an example, in Orchestria, policy is the entire rule set for your supervision. Policy incorporates multiple policies which contain the criteria you are looking for. In one vendor, a policy is a supervision model which incorporates identities of who is to be reviewed. In another, a policy is a single rule, more akin to a lexicon word list. And on the more advanced scale, another vendor's policy is an advanced combination of multiple AI lexicon, graph, and NLP libraries.
The policy lifecycle, regardless of product, for both development and refinement, is fluid and requires constant efforts to not only eliminate junk or false positives, as well as making sure any regulatory changes that happen, language is amended, or new policies are created to cover your content. One of the most difficult tasks is your policy development process. Do you have one? Do you think you have one? Do you need help creating one? Our first step is always analysis, more than just looking at what you have, but also looking at what you are supposed to have.
For example, having a policy that covers customer complaints but doesn't include terms like "you messed up" or like monitoring for gifts and entertainment without the word gift in the policy. This was actually something several firms were cited for in recent years. We know the word hits a lot, but the trick is, and with a good supervision solution, you should be able to reduce the hits based on the use of the word when it is not an issue.
During the analysis phase, the stakeholders must be involved, and this includes anyone that holds a weight into what the policy needs to cover or what the firm's concerns are in the communication. Remember, this doesn't need to be a regulatory item, but this can also be a risk-related item. Then we move on to design.
When it comes down to the actual design of policy, each vendor has different capabilities and thus different design processes. The key points in every system related to design are still the same. What do you need to find, and document it well enough to build it.
Keep in mind, design can be based off your original policies or starting from scratch with constructing new ones that came out of the analysis phase. Construction. Now comes the hard part. Actually building what we just documented, regardless of the system.
Once we dive into construction, this is where the resources are really being utilized. From setting up the systems, establishing data sets, actually constructing the policy and running data through the system to test and validate the results before ever stepping into the refinement cycle.
Refinement. Diving into refinement, we work with the client to review the results of the constructed policy, potentially running through multiple cycles of ingestion and review of the captured content. And then we move on to release.
Probably the highest stress point of the entire cycle is actually putting all these changes into production. It is always strongly advised that you have test users and test events for the policy, potentially also incorporating your changes to run through the system to confirm proper capture.
Validation and reporting. It's always smart to be proactive and run an analysis and trends across all your changes, from things like your capture rates to frequent violators and frequent language results and hits. We've seen many cases where after weeks, a policy violation has skyrocketed due to simple phrases in common documents which cause violation. The faster you jump back into the refinement phase to fix something like this, the more your reviewers will appreciate you. In summary, all in all, the policy lifecycle is probably the most critical piece to the health of your supervision system.
The amount of times we've been at firms helping them recover from a failed policy where reviewers drove the changes and we witnessed critical words and phrases removed from the policies, essentially making them non-functional, is staggering. Having an effective policy lifecycle where you evidence the changes and validate no loss of your true positives is critical in staying out of the sights of the regulators.
Talk to us. We can do a quick evaluation to ensure your policy coverage is as complete as it should be and you have all your necessary documentation. We offer a free assessment on the core components related to your supervision. Policy development strategies. Essentially, how are you ensuring you have your coverage in the new system? Convert.
Some firms have gone the route of extracting the lexicons and phrases from the policy and try to have the destination system interpret it. We've seen various levels of success in going this route, but overall it resulted in extensive testing and validation that must be done.
Or you can migrate, basically manually recreating the policies in your new system based off SME's knowledge.
Usually through a migration, you end up with something better in the end due to the volume of testing you have to do to the policies. In the process, you also target issues in your current policies to make them better in the destination system. It's even possible the new system has a function or feature that can greatly help you with the policy build.
Next would be building new policies, but don't let new scare you. That doesn't necessarily mean starting from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. Some vendors have what they call out-of-the-box policies. Even Technically Creative, with our policy catalog containing over 200 policies, we still feel they are only a great start, but you still need to add or modify them to make them effective for your firm. Just as an example, One vendor's out-of-the-box rate rigging policy included a term that was actually one of the firm's clients' businesses' names, resulting in over 2,000 extra policy violations a day. During the testing, we also noticed a few technical slang terms which were missing as well. For example, shift this up and push high, two phrases used in major rate rigging cases, weren't included. Also remember, out of the box is a project starting point, not an answer to your supervision needs.
Validate and test. It's critical to confirm your new system's policy effectiveness.
This is one we've been working on with our clients a lot lately, specifically testing the results of the policy conversions from Orchestra into the new vendors. This slide is what we've seen off a baseline conversion where we started off with 500,000 items from the archive. 100,000 were known policy hits and 400,000 random sampled non-policy hits. We processed them through Orchestra and the new system with a converted policy. The results ended up showing how the conversions worked out given the complexities of the Orchestra policy language for interpretation. The process resulted in 225,000 more events that triggered the policy, which resulted in a review of the test data. Either Orchestra policy missed a lot or the new product had a larger increase in false positives.
Now, it's important to keep in mind what we've seen when there's a significant number of false positives. The reviewers become complacent, and there's usually an increase in potential oversight. This is usually when we see bulk reviews or missed flags. The reviewers are used to looking at junk all day, and they become desensitized in the review process. It's very important to get those false positives down.
In this case, we dove into the system right away to review and found cases where the new vendor, the policy scoring wasn't taken into account with the positive and negative indicators, plus several of the phrases were interpreted as standalone words. In the end, after looking over the 500,000 items, we discovered no missed items in Orchestra, but 2,400 items missed in the converted policy that actually did hit in Orchestra.
And that's really where the risk lies. You've done months of research, you've been reviewing all the options out there, you've spent time migrating, selecting a vendor, signing contracts, changing your workflows, connecting all the data sources, but the risk in the project lies in the migration, creation, and maintenance of the policies. We highly recommend that you have your policies, at least the initial policies, professionally developed. There's a sharp learning curve to becoming proficient in the new policy language, and if you don't fully understand the differences in functionality, it can lead to some critical oversights. The key takeaway here is test, test, test. You'll be asked by the regulators for evidence of validation when you move to the new system. This is an essential part of what they expect in the due diligence. Plan for maintenance and refinement. It's critical to maintain your policy. The regulators are not accepting the out-of-box answers or policies anymore.
I would call that an understatement, just from the recent inquiries we've been dragged into in the past 2 months. But not to sidetrack the presentation, a policy refinement program is essential to ensuring you have the answers to those inquiries.
The key points you must have are:
first, the sign-off and acceptance process, ensuring any changes has names tied to it for approval. Using a ticketing system, which also is archived to maintain that record, is important.
Second, showing a refinement report. This is a report detailing out what line was changed, added, removed, and why.
Third, a compare document, which is a literal release document showing the before and the after of the policy, which must align with the refinement report.
And last, but not least, is evidencing the policy change. This involves maintaining an output of items that triggered the policy before versus after.
Usually when it comes to this process with Orchestra, we do an export to map out the data that you initially ingested and give you a compare the old versus the new. This gives you the ability to say, hey, look, this hit originally, and now it doesn't hit, and we know it was junk. Or, hey, look, we added these words or fixed this phrase, and now we're catching this that we didn't catch before. Essentially making your policy more effective and evidencing it along the way.
As of today, we have just about 1 year to completely move products and decide what to do with the legacy data. What we're seeing is the typical enterprise level migrations are taking about 10 months to a year. Most of you are still in the RFI, RFP process, budgeting and selecting vendors. Some are in the onboarding and contract negotiation part. But I think this phase is really taking a lot longer than anyone really expected. Ultimately, when it comes down to selecting a vendor, there is no one-to-one solution. Every vendor has its strengths, but each may have a gap essential to your surveillance process. Our key strength here in all of this has been working with each of these vendors to fill that gap, whether it's a control agent or advanced reporting. Once a solution has been selected, the real fun begins, the discovery process, building out the system, building out the workflows. We're seeing this to take about 3 months. Then we're moving on to the ingest, mapping users, defining access rights, and connecting and ingesting the different data sources. As I've stated earlier, the policy development cycle is usually the most lengthy process in the whole migration. At least 4 months should be allocated to this time. The policy development and deployment phase is taking at least 4 months. However, this will vary based on if you have your stakeholders identified, if your definitions are clearly defined, if you're comfortable with the coverage, or if you're having professional support for the conversion process, and then leave time for training, validation, and documentation. If you have any concerns related to being off the platform by end of life, or what you will be doing with your legacy data, please reach out to us. We have options to migrate, support, or archive your supervision history. In addition, we've been in communication with CA, and there are some options reviewed on a case-by-case basis for firms that have migration plans clearly. This concludes our third and final webinar in our 3-part series geared at providing information for CA data protection end-of-life customers. Today we went over identifying policy stakeholders, documenting policy details, filling the gaps, understanding the terminology and functionality differences, validating and testing, and the importance of planning for maintenance and refinement. The recording of our past webinars are also available on our website at technicallycreative.com. Those topics were CA data protection end of life next steps, 5 steps to consider when assessing a new surveillance solution, and understanding new and emerging surveillance technologies, where we discuss the differences and benefits about migrating to a lexicon-based system, a policy and rule system, or entering the world of analytics. In addition, everyone on this webinar is invited to contact me directly at damatuli@technicallycreative.com to set up a free 1-hour policy assessment where we can help answer any of your questions and give you the inside scoop on what we're seeing in the market. Send me over an email now. Simply place policy assessment in the subject line, and I will get back to you today.
Thank you, Christopher and Danielle, for that informative presentation. Now we are going to move to the Q&A section. If you haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, you can still do so through the chat feature on the right. We've had a couple questions come in. Our first question is from Tom. He asks, are there any vendors offering the same policy capabilities as Orchestra?
When it comes to actual policy capabilities, the language, not really as in a direct one-to-one. Everybody's got a different capability, a different feature that makes them better on certain different things, but the language itself, there's no such equal comparison. You have the analytics world, which has theirs. You have the lexicon or other policy type technologies, but everybody's different.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of other factors that you need to take into consideration when selecting a new solution, like the different data channels, the workflow, whether they're cloud or on-site, the reporting options. We can get any of the solutions working, whatever it is. So it's just narrowing down what your requirements are.
Okay. Our next question is from Jessica. Have you seen any success around converting policies from Orchestra into other vendors?
When it comes to converting, no. To put it lightly, there's been varying success in projects. This stuff becomes a project. There's no such thing as let me just import this. There's work involved. You may have a way of importing them initially and get yourself started, and then go through the whole process of, okay, what didn't convert properly, what's interpreted different, run through the refinement tests, run through some test cycles, and look at what you get. And that's where it needs to be. There's no way to just say import it and walk away.
Yeah, no, it's like a starting point, just like any of the out of the box policies. It's a good place to begin the process. And then we'll work with you to help reduce those false positives and absolutely make sure that all your gaps are covered.
Okay. Jared asked, we are currently in process of doing a migration and the results aren't looking good. Do you provide services to help us get on track?
We were actually wondering why you hadn't worked with us. We were wondering when we didn't hear from you.
The simple answer on that is yes, that is what we're doing. We're doing it for a lot of companies. We've got involved in their projects, from some of them from the beginning, some from in the middle, and some from right when they hit crisis mode and they're in panic states. But yes, just feel free to shoot us a mail. We can help you.
Yeah, that's where we're finding our value to really come in. I mean, we are supporting this to the very end. So we're bridging that gap, communicating the different needs of the customers and helping explain it to the vendors. They know their product inside and out. There's some great solutions out there, but trying to convert over what the customer's needs and expectations are and how the vendor operates. We've just been getting that communication clarified.
And keep in mind, most of the times these projects these projects look bad is because of terminology differences. The vendor knows their product and they're speaking their terminology, and while it may sound the same as something with Orchestria, a lot of the times it's not. So that's usually why the projects look bad, and sometimes it's just a matter of fixing the technology, fixing the terminology, and everybody gets on the same page.
Okay. Looks like we have one more question from Ron. We have blocking policies enabled currently in our environment. Do you know a vendor that can adopt those as well?
When it comes to the surveillance world, there's no product on the market that I'm aware of that's actually doing the same kind of blocking capabilities as Orchestria. That might be something we can help with on a side note, depending on the vendor you pick. We've been working with a few vendors to build out, and a couple of the people attending also have seen this. We have our control agents that we've built over the years to augment Orchestrias. Those are coming through some vendors. Since there's no blocking capabilities in a lot of those vendors, they're actually they're OEMing us, white labeling, whatever you want to call it, to help out and close out that gap.
Okay. At this time, we've answered all the questions that have come in. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for our third and final piece of our webinar series, CA Data Protection End of Life, 6 Steps to Migrating Your Policies Compliantly. We hope you all found it very informative. A recording of this webinar, along with the slides, will be emailed to you shortly, so be on the lookout for that. Finally, if you have happened to miss our 2 previous webinars or would like to rewatch either one, the recordings are posted on our website under our events page. Thank you everyone for your time. Technically Creative is ready to assist you if you need any help with your policy transition project. We'd be happy to ease the migration process. If you'd like to engage with us or set up your consultation, please contact us at getinfo@technicallycreative.com or contact Danielle directly at damatuli@technicallycreative.com. Please be sure to place policy assessment in the subject box of the message to receive your complimentary consultation. Thank you and have a good day.